Atlanta, Georgia, 1979. One by one, kids are going missing, with no explanation. There was a real-life monster on the loose. But nearly 40 years later, this case has left more questions than answers. From the producers of Up and Vanished and How Stuff Works, we present an all-new podcast, Atlanta Monster. Subscribe to Atlanta Monster right now on Apple Podcasts and be the first to hear it on January 5th.
Get in touch with technology with TechStuff from HowStuffWorks.com.
Hey there and welcome to TechStuff. I am your host, Jonathan Strickland, and sometimes I'm known as Strick or Baldy by my guest host, Josh Clark of Stuff You Should Know.
Jay Strick.
Jay Strick, that's true.
Yeah, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on the show. And when I asked Josh what he would like to cover, when we started talking about the possibility of doing another Tech Stuff together, he came up with a great suggestion.
Digital immortality.
Digital immortality. You know, I have a feeling the title of this episode will be Who Wants to Live Forever?
Right.
Because I'm a big fan of Queen.
Is that a Queen song?
Yeah, Who Wants to Live Forever? That came from the soundtrack to the hit film Highlander.
Oh.
Cult classic.
Did Queen do the whole soundtrack? Or
They did. They did. Yeah, Highlander and Flash Gordon. They did.
I
the
knew
full
the Flash
soundtrack.
Gordon one.
Yeah.
I did not know Highlander, and I saw Highlander the other day, and I was like, "This does not hold up."
No, the movie is one of those that I wish we could just wipe from history and redo because the concept is amazing.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're going to talk about. Although there are immortals in Highlander.
Yeah. Yeah, there are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the connection, right?
I guess so.
Well, or Queen.
Yeah.
Your love of Queen, and Queen doing the Highlander soundtrack.
Right.
There's the connection.
Immortality. Yeah. Ultimately it all goes back to Tesla. No, we're going to be talking about digital immortality, this concept of using technology to extend our lifespans indefinitely.
Yeah, to immortality.
Yeah, to the point where essentially until the sun burns out.
Right, and the great heat death of the universe.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, yeah, because you could, in theory, if you had digital immortality, there's nothing stopping you from hopping on a spaceship and hightailing it somewhere else.
Sure.
You know?
Or being transmitted at near the speed of light.
Yep. Yeah, you could be beamed from one point to another, and sure, I wonder what that experience would be like.
Well, maybe that's the future of space travel. Physical space travel is as digital beings.
Yeah.
Rather than, maybe that's the wall we keep banging up against, is the physical limitations, and then that will finally unbridle us and allow us to really do like interstellar travel, intergalactic travel.
Though presumably you would have to have something you're beaming into.
Well,
if you're just purely digital, then you have to have something to house that information. I mean, I guess you could just be literally just information beaming around, but I don't know I wonder what that experience would be like. I wonder if it'd be like going to sleep.
Think about a laser.
Yeah.
A laser doesn't have any sort of infrastructure. You
Right.
can just beam and point.
Yeah.
And you're transmitting light information from
Sure.
one place to another at the speed of light, right?
Mhm.
Well, what if we figured out a way to digitize ourselves, as we'll talk about, and we were able to beam ourselves in much the same way that a laser beams light?
Right. But the question is then, because if we are digitizing ourselves, we're usually talking about that with the understanding that digital information rests on top of some physical architecture.
Right.
Just as software needs hardware to run off of.
Right. You need like fiber optics now.
Yeah.
I'm saying, what if you remove that? If
Right.
we figure out a way to remove it, then there's no limitation.
Yeah, if you could get to a point where we become pure information and there is no need for a physical infrastructure beneath that, then we're golden. You know,
Although,
there's no limit then.
I guess we would need some sort of receptacle to beam into, even on the end,
Yeah.
even if we don't have something connecting the 2 points.
That's what I was kind of getting
see
at.
what you
The
mean.
idea being that
there's the flaw in my
so
theory.
you just got to send someone ahead, like, all right, Bill, it's your job to set up all these CPU towers.
Don't let us down, Bill. Do not let us down.
Make sure they're all plugged in, and please use one of those uninterrupted power supplies. Because
Yes.
if there's a blackout, we don't want, we lost Lucy.
Right.
She
And
didn't make it over.
please don't smoke while you're setting them up, Bill, because we could smell it last time. It stunk up the whole place.
Right. So to get down to what we're actually talking about, you probably picked up on this. The idea of digital immortality largely revolves around this concept of somehow transferring human consciousness and experience into a digital format.
Right.
Usually the way we describe it is uploading your brain into a computer.
Right.
That's kind of the easiest way to explain it. And there are a lot of really smart people who have been talking about this possibility, beyond saying it's hypothetical, saying it will be possible.
Or it will happen. A lot of people strut around like they're just cock of the walk saying it's going to happen. And sometimes they even put like dates on things like this.
Oh, yeah, no, the guy we got to talk about immediately is Ray Kurzweil.
Sure.
Kurzweil, famous for his futurism predictions, including the idea that we will reach what is called the singularity. That is the point at which technology is evolving so quickly that there is no meaningful way to describe the present because it's changing that fast.
Yeah. And the way I always think about singularity is usually it's also the moment where one of two things has just happened. Either an AI has awakened and become conscious, right? And therefore it is now the master of the universe as far as we're concerned. Or it's the moment we biology merges with technology at a point where we're able to remove ourselves from the limitations of evolution and chart our own course from that point on.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I would argue that there's also there's the possibility of developing technology that allows us to genetically alter ourselves without having to directly incorporate like computers or electronics into our systems. That also can be. It's transhumanism is really what we're talking about here.
We're like right there.
Yeah, we're on the
it's
cusp.
Already kind of happening, like very crudely. But we're like right there as far as that last definition you gave.
Yeah, we're there. Well, even with the incorporation of technology, we're getting there. You look at things like cochlear implants.
Yeah, right.
And while this technology is specifically meant to give people who have either lost or never developed a particular sense or maybe some other form of neurological process. Right now it's meant to address that.
Right.
In the future, it could be meant to augment, not just to repair damage or to address a loss of something.
Right. Like the defining characteristic of transhumanism is that you don't want a blade prosthetic leg.
Right.
Because the one you were born with was removed.
Right.
You want a blade prosthetic leg because you want to be able to run faster.
Right.
It's not to make up for a loss. It's to further things.
Right. It's to go to the
Improve.
next step. Yeah.
Exactly.
So this singularity idea is very closely related to digital immortality, and largely because of Ray Kurzweil. Because as it turns out, I think it's fair to say Ray Kurzweil has an issue with the concept of mortality.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, I don't know that much about Kurzweil. I mean, I'm slightly familiar, but you clearly know a lot more about him than I do. And I was wondering if he is like a fretful fanny. Like, does he constantly worry about misstepping and dying? And people die in really weird, random, mundane ways every day.
Yeah.
And I wonder if he just lives in literal mortal fear of that.
Well, he is certainly taking great precautions to extend his life because he does believe firmly that we will reach this point in which technology will allow us to extend our lifespans indefinitely within his lifetime if he takes care of himself.
Right.
So he is determined. He doesn't, you would kind of feel like a doofus if you were capable of feeling if you died the day before they invented digital immortality.
Right.
It's like shucks.
Right. It's the last guy to die in a war right after, like right before the ceasefire's been called or something.
Right. Yeah. There's a great, have you ever seen, there's a British sketch comedy show called That Mitchell and Webb Look. Have you ever seen that?
No, you've told me about it though.
Yeah. It's two comedians, David Mitchell and Robert Webb, who do this series. And one of the ones they have is, it's just supposed to be a off the cuff conversation between the two. So it's not in the context of a sketch.
So basically like what we're doing.
Kind of what we're doing now, except it's obviously scripted. And ours is not.
No, clearly.
But in that case, they have a conversation where David Mitchell is very upset with the thought that his generation is going to be the last generation to die.
Yeah.
And he is spiteful of the next generation.
Right.
He's mad at them for being able to live forever while he has to die.
Yeah.
Whereas Robert Webb is like, you could just be happy for them. And he says, no. Same sort of thing I think with Kurzweil is that he's taking great pains to take care of himself. He's an advocate for a healthy diet and exercise, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
He takes something like 150 dietary supplements.
I'm going to have to correct you, and this is from the article that you wrote, 250.
Oh, wow.
a day.
Yeah. 250 a
Like
day.
he's just constantly taking pills, you know?
Yeah, so that's and there are plenty of studies that have suggested that unless you are suffering a deficiency of some sort, these supplements are not actually helpful.
Well, it's kind of like vitamin A, I believe. Vitamin A is known to help you see better.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure it's vitamin A.
Yeah.
And it's been shown that if you're, especially like night vision is a little deficient, that if you eat some carrots, your night vision will improve. So carrots do help you.
Right.
But if it's already up to whatever your baseline night vision level is,
You can't
you
improve
can eat
beyond
all
that.
the carrots in the world and it's not going to help you. As a matter of fact, you will turn orange. My wife
Yep.
turned a little orange because she liked carrots so much when she was a kid. So, but she couldn't see any better beyond her baseline night vision level.
Right. It's
So I think it's the same thing as what you're saying.
same thing with vitamin C.
Right.
Once you hit a certain level of vitamin C, anything beyond that, you're essentially just going to pee away.
And in fact, vitamins can become toxic.
Oh,
Too much
yeah.
of anything is toxic to the human
Sure.
body because it seeks homeostasis, right?
Right.
So I'm wondering if Kurzweil, surely he's smart enough to know, like, maybe I should cut this one out, or
Yeah.
maybe I'm taking too much of this.
Well, and it's also possible that the reported number of supplements that he takes has been, exaggerated as it's been reported over and over again. I am personally a little skeptical that he takes that many, but at any rate, the whole point is that he wants to make certain to live long enough to see the day when his prediction comes true, that we will have the technological ability to port a person's mind into some kind of electronic construct.
Okay, Mango, so what's your elevator pitch for Part-Time Genius?
Elevator pitch?
Yeah, the 2-sentence description, how you talk about it. Like, for example, I might say, hosted by the guys who founded Mental Floss, Part-Time Genius is a super fun show on a mission to make everything more interesting. So what's yours?
Oh, I'm so bad at this. Like, if someone asked me for an elevator pitch, I'd probably just start talking about elevators. Like, did you know that the mirrors that are sometimes placed by elevators are there as this psychological trick? Because looking at yourself makes the wait times feel shorter, or that peeing in an elevator in Singapore is a crime, so the elevators are actually equipped with these urine detection devices. If it senses too much urine, the doors close and this alarm goes off until the cops come.
Is there anywhere that peeing in an elevator is not a crime? But anyway, maybe we should change our name to Part-Time Genius. One really big question, lots of super smart facts.
And tangents. We go on so many tangents.
Check out Part-Time Genius from the How Stuff Works Network. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your Smarty Pants podcasts.
May I point something out?
Sure.
I have just, while you were speaking, pulled out my calculator, and Ray Kurzweil takes a pill every 5.76 minutes a day, assuming he stays up all 24 hours in a day.
Assuming, again, that number is in fact accurate. That the number of supplements, not that I completely trust your math.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the concepts here about how this could, in theory, happen. Now, obviously, we are not at the point where we can create any kind of hardware and or software that would allow us to migrate an intelligence from our meaty brains.
Right, and that's a huge problem, what
Yeah.
you've just said. We are dealing in something called software or hardware, when what the substrate that our brains and consciousness exist on is what you would term wetware.
Yeah.
Biological material.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily analogous to a computer.
Yeah.
Even though people tend to think of the brain as such, that doesn't mean that it is the same thing.
That is absolutely correct. I mean, let's take memory for an example. Memory is a great way to illustrate the difference between a computer system and the brain. All right, so in a computer system, you end up designating a certain space on some medium,
Right.
like on magnetic tape or in certain, it all depends on whatever the form is that you're saving it to. But at any rate, it all ends up being zeros and ones.
Right.
And it is unaltered. If you call up a file and, you haven't done anything to it since the last time you looked at it, it's going to be exactly the same.
Right.
Unless there's some sort of corruption in the file, or you have made changes to it and then saved it again, you're not, it's going to be the same experience every time.
Right.
Human memory, totally different.
Yeah.
A memory is, and we only sort of understand memory. We don't have a full grasp on how memory works.
That's true.
But based upon what we do know, when you experience something, your brain creates a certain neural pathway in response to the stimuli you are experiencing. So, for example, right here in this room, my brain is
thinking about my hair.
Your hair, the heat in this room, the light in this room, little things. And I'm not noticing everything.
It's all making my hair look pretty good, isn't it?
In stark contrast with all the rest of the experiences, it is amazing hair. So these pathways are forming in my brain.
Right.
Later on, assuming that I have converted this particular experience to long-term memory, which is a pretty big assumption, honestly. I can't remember what I podcasted about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think my hair's going to make it into your long-term memory.
The more you say it, the more likely it's going to happen.
My hair.
When I think back on it, my brain will reconstruct that same pathway. So the memory is essentially representative in the physical relationship between the various synapses that light up when I have this experience.
Right. So there is a physical pathway that is retraced when you recall.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's not like your memory of how great my hair looks is sitting in one little spot of your brain like it would be on a computer's magnetic tape.
It's distributed and it's faulty. Because when I remember, the process of remembering, sometimes that pathway doesn't form exactly the way it did.
And sometimes it adds new stuff.
Exactly. I might fill in some gaps.
Like imagine if you opened a PowerPoint presentation that you'd made.
Yeah.
And there were a few slides missing, but then there was some new stuff, and maybe it was a little bit better than it was before, but you hadn't done anything to it.
I don't remember this transition, but all right, we'll go with it.
Just the very act of retrieving it from your computer's memory and opening it again changes it.
Right.
That doesn't happen on a computer, but it does in human memory is what you're saying, right?
Exactly. That is exactly what I'm saying. And the reason why I say it is that that's a problem. Because if we are ever to move from wetware inside our brains to hardware and software in the digital realm, unless we factor that in somehow, like we create an algorithm that mimics the experience of remembering something,
right?
The experience is going to be fundamentally different. The experience of remembering will be totally different. I mean, one of the reasons why I very much argue against eyewitness testimony for things, especially for crimes that might have happened a long time in the past, is that our memories are faulty.
Very.
Now, if we were in this other experience where we had moved to hardware and software and our memories were more analogous to computer memory, that would not be an issue.
Sure. Eyewitness stuff
recall.
would be great.
Yeah. So, but that's just one illustration of how this is a tricky thing.
It is tricky. And you say that, comparatively speaking, it sounded like your take on it was that human memory is faulty compared to computer memory. I would posit that there's also another way to look at it, that human memory is much more robust and rich than computer memory. Because think about it, when you say smell something for the first time, and then you smell it again and again, that memory of what something smells like is going to become more detailed. There's going to be more to it. It'll become more refined, and it'll be totally different from that first scent memory that you created of whatever it was you smelled. And so I would posit, again, sorry to use that word twice, but it makes me sound pretty smart when I do.
It does. It's pretty good.
That additional adding new material, adding new stuff to it when you recall things or when you experience something, the ability to make your memory more robust and more rich and to be able to refine it just through recall, to me, is superior to just straight, here's the information that a computer will give you, and it should be exactly what you had before.
Well, and also with memories, we can associate stuff that previously was not connected in our brains. Whereas with computers, the way you do that is through metadata. you tag stuff.
Right.
You're like, okay, well, let's tag this piece of information with all the metadata we can think of that describes what this information is really about. And then if I want to associate things, I have to look for similar tags.
Exactly.
But in my brain, it does it automatically, and it does it in ways that you cannot necessarily anticipate, which can lead to things like innovation and creativity.
Yes, precisely. And you also kind of hinted at something that's the big problem facing the idea of uploading ourselves onto the internet, Strick. It is that with memory, we can figure out memory. We'll eventually figure out how human memory works exactly.
Right.
And that's what there's a philosopher called David Chalmers. That's what he's pointed out as the easy problem of consciousness. We understand, we're going to understand how the mind functions.
Yeah, sometime down the road, we will figure that out.
There's a hard problem, is what Chalmers has also pointed out, in figuring out how phenomenal experience, our experience of reality, is produced from those processes.
Sure.
That is the big issue that is facing us trying to upload ourselves onto the internet. It's like when you talked about meta. The computer's not writing meta itself. It might be able to simulate memory retrieval in its own way, but it's not writing its own tags.
Right.
It's not making these connections. It takes a human consciousness to do that. And not only do we not know how to make a computer simulate that, we don't even know how we do that.
Right.
And we may never know. There's a lot of philosophers out there that are like, we may never figure out the hard problem of consciousness.
Yeah.
What's up, everybody? I'm Carl Tart.
What's up? I'm Jackie Neal.
I'm Edgar Mopazier.
And we are the host of a brand new podcast called Culture Kings. It's on How Stuff Works. You already love all the rest of their shows, so why don't you start listening to one more and support three black dudes? That's tight, right? It's time. We're living in a world where y'all gotta support us or you're racist.
Y'all got to keep us off these streets.
I mean, that ain't gonna never happen to me because I went to college for a semester. Edgar, what are we going to be talking about on this?
Well, I was wondering, is there an advantage to sounding white?
Is there an advantage to sounding white?
Sure.
If you work for Donald Sterling. Jackie, what's something that you want to talk about?
Why you hate the Cubs so much, Carl?
Because the Cubs are trash, their fans are the worst, and we can get all into that. But we only got 10 seconds left. So now I got to tell you that when I get into it, I'm going to be cussing. So don't let your kids listen to it. It's explicit language on this show. But find it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast.
Neuroscientists would say that clearly the mind, which is what we could probably, use as an umbrella term for things like consciousness and experience and all that, intelligence, all that kind of stuff, that emerges from the physical construct of the brain, because you can observe changes to the mind when someone suffers an illness or injury that damages the brain, and therefore it stands to reason that the mind, in fact, is a product of the brain. So if you could figure out how to simulate a brain to a significant level of sophistication, hypothetically, you could have intelligence emerge naturally from that simulation.
Hypothetically.
Because we can't do it yet.
Right.
The best we can do right now is to simulate a few thousand neurons, but there are, we're talking about billions of neurons and synapses in the human brain.
Yeah, from what I saw, the low but average estimate is something like 86 billion in a normal human brain. No, I'm sorry, not synapses, neurons.
Yeah, neurons.
It's trillions of synapses.
Right. So it's incredibly complicated. And in fact, there's some people who suggest that it may be, to truly simulate a human brain, you may have to go down to the molecular level, at which point the computational requirements for simulating that brain are going to be so vast as to be impractical or impossible to achieve.
Well, you mentioned the Blue Brain Project in this article that you wrote. And I was just kind of skimming their website, and they mentioned that in their simulations, it requires about a laptop's worth of computing power. They didn't say what kind of RAM or hard drive or storage or anything it had.
Sure.
They just used a laptop's worth, so you can kind of let your imagination run with it. But that was required just for one individual neuron to power.
Yeah, so we're talking about
86 billion laptops worth.
That's should be great news for
Lenovo.
Exactly. So any hardware manufacturers out there. There are actually quite a few different projects out there that are attempting to simulate brains for one reason or another, not necessarily so that we can port consciousness to them, but also to just study things like, how our brains work, how we might be able to treat brain damage or illnesses that damage the brain, that how certain medications might react to our brains, building these very complex simulations. So some of them, MIT has a course on the emergent science of Connectomics.
I've seen that lately too. It sounds so full of BS, but apparently it's a real deal. And once you look into it, it makes total sense. It's just a terrible name.
Connectomics is all about the connections that happen within the brain.
Right.
And it does. Connectomics sounds like it's some sort of weird economics course.
Right, or like maybe an L. Ron Hubbard book.
Yeah, like Dianetics, Dianetics Part 2, Connectomics.
Right.
So that's an example. There's the U.S. Brain Project. There's an EU Brain Project. There's the Google Brain Project.
One, right?
Yeah.
Isn't there?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's the Google Brain Project. In 2012, they hired Ray Kurzweil.
Yeah, he's their chief engineer, I think.
Director of engineering.
Yeah.
For specifically for the Google Brain Project.
Clearly Google has just put their cards on the table. They're like, we're putting some serious resources behind figuring out how to get people on to digital consciousness.
Right. It's one thing to think about this kind of, armchair computer scientist, neuroscientist sort of approach, but they're really putting actual money towards research and development on this stuff, including hiring another guy named Jeff Hinton, who is a British computer scientist who specializes in neural networks. So they're looking at using neural networks for lots of stuff, not just to simulate a human brain. I mean, that might be part of it too.
Sure.
But neural networks can be really useful for processing different types of information for all sorts of applications.
Right, true. And also, I mean, if you think about it, just figuring out some of the efficiencies that the human brain has evolved to include as far as networking goes, if you could just even get some insight or inspiration from that, that could help tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some other great things I can mention. There's Ted Berger, who is a professor at the University of Southern California's Center for Neuroengineering, who built a prosthetic of the hippocampus.
Oh, wow.
Now, the hippocampus is
That's a money gland.
Hippocampus is largely associated with the formation of memories.
Yeah.
Also with incorporation of emotion. But memory is a big part of what hippocampus is involved in. So
I think it also takes in sensory information and determines what region it should be transmitted to, if it should go into long-term memory or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of like
it's a big deal.
A big engineer in this case. And so in 2011, came up with a proof of concept hippocampal prosthesis and tested it in live rats. In 2012, tested it in non-human primates. And supposedly sometime this year, they're going to test it in people.
Man, that is amazing. So, like, if you have some sort of damage to your hippocampus and you're no longer able to form memories, then this would be the thing for you, kind of?
Yeah. I mean, this could end up being, depending upon the nature of the problem. I mean, it could potentially be a treatment for things like Alzheimer's. Whether or not that turns out to be the case, we'll still have to wait and see, but it is very promising.
Have you ever heard of Henry Mollison?
I have not.
He is like one of the more famous patients. Or to save time, you could just say one of the more patients.
Yeah.
In as far as memory studies go, because he had I believe epilepsy, and some old timey doctor gave him some brain surgery and messed up his hippocampus, and the guy was unable to form new memories from that point on. He could remember everything up to that point, up to the surgery. Then after that, it was almost like his brain refreshed every, I think, something like 30 seconds.
Wow.
And he just lived in an institution and was fortunately taken care of by a few doctors that like really studied him, but also like really kept him from the public limelight. His name wasn't published until after he died. But he yielded a lot of information about how memories are formed thanks to the hippocampus. But it sounds like he would have been a great candidate for that.
Yeah, I'm reminded of and I have to trust other people's details of this because I have no memory of it. I there was a time where I had a kidney stone.
Okay.
And it was so bad that I had to go to the hospital.
Yes.
And they treated me with a very powerful painkiller.
That just knocked your hippocampus out of commission.
I couldn't remember things. I had no short-term memory.
Well, it makes sense. Like also when you're drinking, your hippocampal function is messed with. You are not forming new memories. And you require the hippocampus to do this. So if you're doing something, if you're on drugs, if you have some sort of structural damage, if you have been drinking, like that's why you're not forming new memories. That accounts for a blackout. That accounts for amnesia. Your hippocampus is just not functioning properly.
Exactly. There's another expert I want to mention, Anders Sandberg of the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University.
I am a huge fan of that institute.
Yeah?
Yeah, one of my favorite people in the world works there. His name's Nick Bostrom.
Oh, yeah.
Love that guy.
I know of Nick Bostrom. So Sandberg had said, this is a quote, "The point of brain emulation is to recreate the function of the original brain." So this is talking about actually creating a copy of a person's brain, not just the concept in general, but in the specific case of this person's brain, we're going to recreate it digitally.
Neat.
If run, it will be able to think and act as the original brain. We are now able to take small brain tissue samples and map them in 3D. These are at exquisite resolution, but the blocks are just a few microns across. We can run simulations of the size of a mouse brain on supercomputers, but we do not have the total connectivity yet. As methods improve, I expect to see automatic conversion of scanned tissue into models that can be run. The different parts exist, but so far there is no pipeline from brains to emulations. Now, he thinks that it may be very difficult to ever simulate memory in a computer the way that humans do, for the very reasons we mentioned earlier.
Right.
He also points out that there is a problem with this particular approach, as the scanning essentially damages or destroys the brain tissue because there's not a non-invasive way.
Oh, it's like Heisenberg all over again, huh?
You gotta pretty much crack the noggin open and mush around in the gray stuff to find out, to really scan it and get that resolution.
So then this scanning would either kill you or you need a freshly dead person, in which case there's no longer consciousness there.
Right, exactly.
Oh, that sounds like a big problem.
So you could make a copy of a dead brain, which, as you point out, not really that useful.
Right.
Or you could make a copy of a living brain, but in the process you kill the living brain, you are left with the copy.
Right.
Now, theoretically, this copy would think and react in a way that would be exactly the way the original person thought and reacted.
Mm-hmm.
But the original person's still dead. So, Josh, if you had this done, there would be a Josh computer, JoshBot 2000. A JoshBot would think like you, would have quips like you.
Now with even better hair.
With even better hair than you. And feel somewhat smug about it.
Right.
Meanwhile, Josh Clark, the human being, would be no more.
Dead.
And this comes to another big problem in the concept of digital immortality, which is continuity.
Sure.
So continuity being the continuous experience of you as Josh Clark, whether you are in your meat body or ported over to some digital format.
I don't think that's that big of a problem.
Really?
Think about it, man. Every day we have gaps in continuity. We go to sleep and then we wake up.
But you're talking about functional continuity. There's also physical continuity, and there's the real problem.
Oh, well, lay it on me.
So functional continuity is exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's our experience that we are having, and it does have interruptions, whether it's when we go to sleep or we are put under for a
kidney
surgical.
stones or something.
Exactly. All of that, it could end up being a break in our functional continuity.
Right.
We can recover from that because the physical continuity, the stuff that's in our brains, is still there, so that even though we have that reset, we can come back and everything will be fine.
Right.
If the physical continuity is destroyed, as in the actual brain dies, then you have a problem. Now, an interesting thing is that I've looked at some neuroscientists and their work and what they have to say about this. And it was really interesting to me. There's a guy named Steven Novella.
Mm-hmm.
He's a neuroscientist, works at Yale. He has a great podcast called Skeptic's Guide to the Universe.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a critical thinker and a skeptic. He has talked a lot about this as well. He's blogged about it. And his idea, or his perspective, the way he communicates it, is that as humans, we have brains that are divided into two hemispheres. Now, through drugs or through surgery, you can have one of those hemispheres separated from the other. It essentially is rendered inactive.
Right.
But the two hemispheres are largely copies of each other. So even if this does happen, you can have a relatively normal experience. You might find that some things are now very hard to do, like math. That could end up being really difficult.
If your corpus callosum isn't there, I would guess math would be hard.
Exactly, yeah. So he says, but these two halves, which individually can act as a single brain, work together. And we have, even if you have the one shut down, the other one can continue to work. You're still you, largely you.
Right.
So he says, what if we then extend this and we make the assumption that, yes, we have created the hardware and software that will allow for the simulation of a brain in some way. We connect that to a person's brain so that it becomes an extension. It's another part of the brain, kind of like a third hemisphere, I guess.
Yeah.
And so this one is starting to form pathways that mimic what your brain does naturally.
Right.
So over time, it helps you think the way you think already. It also starts to build in redundant memories. So it's essentially backing up your memories. And gradually, it's going to act like another hemisphere of your brain.
Right.
And it could even be more powerful. Potentially, you could do things like include algorithms that make it way easier for you to do math.
Right.
You'd be a math genius.
I would hope that if I were uploaded on the internet, my math skills would just automatically improve. I would expect that.
Yeah, there's certain little base assumptions you want to make, right? That's one of them.
Yeah.
It'd be funny to be digitally immortal but crap at math.
Right.
So
I guess you get made fun of by all the other digital immortals.
Very likely, the Kurgan is just taunting you before cutting off your digital head. So his point being that over time, you would be relying more heavily on the AI version of your brain. That even while your meat brain goes to sleep, your AI brain could stay awake, so that you as you could remain active all day long. Because it's your organic brain that's sleeping, but your AI brain takes over.
Yeah.
And it could get to a point where you don't even really notice that part of you is asleep. And you could theoretically reach a point where your AI brain is doing the vast majority of the work, so that the time when your organic brain dies is a non-event to you.
Okay, so first of all, I could see the AI brain becoming very resentful of the organic brain, right? Having to do all the work while it just lays around and sleeps, right?
I don't know that the left brain gets mad at the right brain.
Mine does.
Okay, well, that's fair.
They're always arguing.
They're at odds.
They're doing it right now.
Hey guys, Josh and I had so much to say about this topic that it turned out it was long enough to be 2 episodes, not just 1 episode. So we're going to stop things right here. You can find Josh's work at Stuff You Should Know, including the website, the podcast. They do live events, so check that out. And if you guys have suggestions for me, whether it's a particular type of technology you want me to cover, or to do a profile on a person or a company, or even just a suggestion for another guest host or interview, let me know. Send me a message. That address is techstuff@howstuffworks.com, or drop me a line on Twitter, Tumblr, or Facebook. The handle at all 3 is TechStuffHSW, and I'll talk to you again really soon.
For more on this and thousands of other topics, visit howstuffworks.com.
Join the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast for a mind-expanding journey into topics scientific, psychological, philosophical, and mythic. In our recent episode, Sex Bots, From Objectification to Therapeutic Surrogates, we consider arguments for and against the embrace of synthetic paramours. Explore what current technology and human nature tell us about the future of robotic sexuality, what ethical pitfalls we have to avoid, and how they might even prove therapeutic for wounded and traumatized individuals. Check it out on Apple Podcasts, and please subscribe so you'll never miss an episode.